Got your back.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 5 of our Just Work podcast. It's Ernest Adams here with Kim Scott. And
Hello,
we are,
Ernest.
hello, Kim. And we are really excited to have a great conversation today. Kim, I appreciate you sending over to me the couple pages of rewrite that you're working on for the rewrite of Just Work, and very, very stimulating, particularly this topic of being aware of being self-righteous.
Yes.
And shaming, because I think it's just such a powerful concept when you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and being an upstander and being an ally. And can you go too far?
Yes, absolutely. This, as you pointed out, I really wrestled with this section of the book, and I'm not at all sure that I got it right. And there's probably more than a little white guilt or something. So point it out to me, and let's get this right, because I think it's important.
Absolutely. Look, I think it's really important too. And I think we'll talk about this, but one of the things that stood out to me, and I can't wait for all of you listeners to hear what Kim is about to read to us, but there's so much science behind how the human brain works.
Yeah.
And shame is one of those really interesting emotions that is scientifically based and rooted in how our brain operates, right?
Yeah.
It's so tied to fight or flight.
Yeah.
It is so tied to self-preservation. So that all that came out to me as you were going through this. So I know we'll get into that as we begin to talk about this.
Amazing. Okay. So just for the listeners, we're still in the chapter on upstanders. And this is a cautionary, a word of caution about how upstanding can go wrong. So this section is called Beware of Self-Righteous Shaming. It's the responsibility of upstanders to intervene when they notice bias, prejudice, or bullying. But attempting to coerce people into changing their attitudes or behavior by indulging in self-righteous shaming isn't going to work. Remember, radical respect optimizes for collaboration. It doesn't seek to coerce through force or shame. Often our intentions in shaming are good. We're trying to defend a vulnerable individual or group of people who are being disrespected. Or perhaps we have been shamed ourselves, and so it feels fine to fight fire with fire. Or we are just fed up with a broken system that isn't working for us, so we lash out at a person rather than trying to fix the system. Or perhaps the people we are shaming are more powerful than we are, so we assume they somehow deserve it or can take it. Self-righteous shaming is an act of vengeance, not repair. It is a form of bullying, and fighting bullying with bullying isn't going to reduce bullying. Ultimately, insofar as we know at some level that it won't work, it is an act of despair. Or sometimes it's just communicating in bad faith in hopes of gaining something. Given how addictive the rush of shaming others is, and how social media tends to facilitate this kind of communication, self-righteous shaming is on the rise like a sickening virus, and it is spilling over from social networks into today's workplaces.
Kim, can I stop you, Kim?
Yeah, please.
So that line that says, often our intentions in shaming are good.
Yeah.
I struggled with that as I began to read more around what you were saying in that paragraph and the next paragraph, because when you think about it coming from a place of bullying and a place of vengeance and a place of, I guess the question is, are the intentions really good?
Yeah, maybe we want to believe the intentions are good. I don't know. When we read about the Incredible Hulk, we can dive deeper. I mean, there are times when someone I care about at work or just in the world has been harmed, and I want to step in and say something. Like, for example, I was at Baskin Robbins with my kids getting ice cream.
Okay.
And there was kind of a pack of teenage boys ahead of us. And they were starting to harass the person who was scooping ice cream. And they were sort of saying, and this is in Palo Alto, and so most of these teenage boys were white boys. And the person scooping, they couldn't tell what her nationality was. And they were like, what are you? Where are you from? And I said to them, are you being respectful, boys? and to my surprise, they actually backed off and they looked ashamed and they stopped. So it was like a moment of upstanding. And part of the reason why I did that, I was like, I was writing this book, and that made me more aware of not being the silent bystander. But also, I was with my children, and I thought, gosh, if I don't,
they need to see an example.
Yeah, yes. So I thought I thought my intentions were good. Well, I was telling the story to someone else later, and my daughter was like, "Mom, that's not what you said. What you said was you guys are being assholes."
Okay, that's a little bit different. Yes.
Yeah. And so I was kind of fighting bullying with bullying. I was being, kind of a Karen, really.
Yeah.
Was for my children's perspective. So I don't know. I don't know what were my intentions in that moment. I think they were good, but maybe they weren't. Maybe I just wanted to show off in front of my kids that I could outbully these teenage boys. I don't know.
Or maybe you were not clear with yourself on your intentions.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. And so, and I think that's an interesting, and I think that's why I struggle with the statement. Our intentions are good, because I don't think people always know what their intentions are.
Yeah.
And I think we think, right. And that really taking time to understand our intentions.
Yeah.
This work, interacting with each other as humans, really, we should be intentional about how we do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet we're strangers to ourselves. So
correct.
Often.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's some good editing right there. I got some work to do when we finish. Love it. But thank you. It'll get better. It gets better.
Of course.
Okay. So the next thing I said, and this is where I would love everyone's thoughts on this, but right now yours, and then listeners, as you read this, write in, and as you hear this, write in and let us know what you think. Self-righteous shaming happens on the right and on the left. If you're on the left, you're probably thinking about how it applies to people on the right. Or maybe you're the self-critical type who notices it on the left too. Ditto in reverse. If you're on the right, the truth is we all do it from time to time, unfortunately. So I think when people hear the term self-righteous shaming, they're thinking various words. What do you think people are thinking when I talk about self-righteous shaming?
Yeah, when I hear self-righteous
woke, they're thinking, they're thinking this kind of stuff.
Absolutely. They're putting people on blast. They are, they are holding people accountable. Are some things that come to mind.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if this is, I actually cut this out of the book, but I would love to get your thoughts. So one of the examples on the right that I was thinking of when I wrote that was during the confirmation hearings for Brett Kavanaugh. Yes. I forgot who it was. Somebody some senator said, of Christine Blasey Ford's testimony, which I thought was remarkable and
very brave
and strong. Yes. Yeah. And I admired, said, this is the most shameful proceeding. And he used the word shameful, that this body is some, sort of self-righteous. So to me, that was an example of kind of a coercive self-righteous shaming. And he probably thought he was protecting Brett Kavanaugh's honor. I don't know what. Yeah. But that's kind of what was in my mind. What do you think?
No, I can see that. I mean, I see it happening both on the right and left all the time. I mean, where we're trying to shame each other into some form of being right.
Yeah.
Right. In some form of rallying a base of people. Right.
Yeah.
If I say this, then people, right. If I say this, when people will align with me, and therefore I will have more support. Yeah. So again, that goes me back to, that's not great English. Takes me back to the statement of, are you really having good intentions?
Yeah. Is it about you, or is it about your audience?
Absolutely.
And if it's about your audience, then it's not, your intentions are not so good. It's like not communicating in good faith. And maybe that's another thing I need to talk about here.
Yeah.
Is so often we're sort of trying to make, points rather than to communicate. We're trying to win points, communication points.
The other thing, Kim, as I was reading this that I thought would be really interesting to weave in somewhere is if you're trying to prove a point without empathy.
Yes.
For the people who you are quote unquote standing up for.
Yeah.
Then that is never a good thing either.
Yeah. Yeah.
because the empathy forces you now to think about how will they receive this, they being whomever I'm trying to defend, whomever I'm trying to upstand for, whomever I'm
Yeah.
trying to intervene on behalf of.
Yeah. Do you also have to have empathy with the person who's causing harm? Like, did I need to have more empathy for those teenage boys in line? I really didn't. I was pissed off at them. And part of the reason, frankly, I was pissed off at them was that I don't like seeing white kids behave that way because it makes me feel ashamed of so now all of a sudden I feel ashamed. So I'm shaming them, and I'm not centering the person who was scooping the ice cream, who I was ostensibly defending.
Right. So this is why I go back to what were your intentions in that moment, right? Because it was no longer about the person scooping the ice cream. It was about you and the deep-rooted feelings you had and what this triggered in you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would just say, I think a lot of times I would, the answer to your question is, should you have empathy for the person who you're speaking to? Look, the well-adjusted answer is yes. We should always have empathy for others as we
really
interact,
hard.
right? It is really hard, but particularly if the person is a bully, right?
Yeah.
And if you are going up against a bully, if you're doing a Hulk or you're doing, some of these other, it's very difficult to have empathy for that person.
Yeah.
However, I have found through experience that, really thinking about that person as a scared little boy or a scared little girl or a scared person, and not understanding what happened to them in their life to get them to that point does get me to it's an unlock for me to have empathy for people who I do not believe always deserve empathy.
Yeah. I had an experience recently where something along these lines happened. So I took my daughter to a Billie Eilish concert.
Oh, cool.
And my daughter loves Billie Eilish as much as she loves anything in this world. And it was very important to her to get right up to the barricade. So we actually spent the night on the sidewalk outside the forum in a tent, to get early in line. So this was really important to her. Okay. And we got almost all the way to the front. There were a couple of people in front of us, and she was really excited. And the concert starts, and at Billie Eilish's audience, I don't know if you've ever been to a Billie Eilish concert.
I haven't been, but I know about her.
Largely women. It's probably 80% girls and women. And so the concert's going on, and my daughter's really happy. And this big blonde guy pushes in front of her. And he's, a foot and a half taller than she is. So there's no reason why he can't be. He could have gotten in front of me, but there's just no reason. And then in front of my daughter were two Black women who were being very sweet with her, and then, making sure she saw. And this guy pushed and was pushing them and was kind of ruining the whole concert for everyone.
Yeah.
And when the concert was over, this Black woman and I turned at this guy, and I mean, we just were letting him have it. And I said, it would have cost you nothing to let my daughter, who's a foot and a half shorter than you. And he was like, it was not my intention. I was like, your intentions don't matter here. That's not good enough. All that you need to intend not to be an asshole, so this was I was tired and I was grouchy.
That's a really good example, though.
And then, so that was some self-righteous shaming right there. But I was like, I held on to this for a few days. I was like, really, these, it's guys like that. What's wrong? And, and I was kind of going and making maybe some unfair generalizations. And then I kind of thought about, well, what was the system? What was we were on the floor. The system is chaos. There is chaos. No system.
Open standing.
And what happens in chaos? The biggest people get
the
more
bullies
than their
win.
fair share.
The bullies win.
And if I were a foot and a half taller than that guy, what would I have done? I'm not so sure. I can be pretty aggressive myself. And so then I realized, what we need to think about the system, and the system, and that guy was I could tell he was really bummed out because he thought he was being very helpful. He was the security guards are passing out water. He was passing it back. I think he viewed himself as this,
as an enabler for everybody to have fun.
As this, good guy. Yeah. And anyway.
What I love most about that example, Kim, is it speaks to how difficult it is to self-regulate in the moment sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Particularly when you see bullying happening and you really want to be an upstander.
Yeah.
It is to say to yourself, what's happening here? Why is this happening? How is this other person perceiving it?
Yeah.
And how might I interact in a way that is respectful of both sides?
Yeah.
It's really hard to do. Really hard to do.
Yeah. Really hard to do. And I failed totally.
Well, and also in that moment, you also had something else going on, which you were being mama bear.
Yes.
And protection of your daughter, right?
Yeah.
Which is, which I think is, totally understandable as well.
Yeah. And I think, frankly, the part of the self-righteousness came in because of race as well. Like, I was ashamed this big white guy had shoved these black women, and and I that was also part of it, if I'm honest with myself,
So that's a really interesting thing. I have to think to myself, do I, as a black person, I can't say that I carry that same level of guilt, shame.
Yeah, but culture. You don't have, I have what to be guilty and shameful about, my ancestors owned slaves. That's not, and I got to do something with that other than yell at this poor guy at the, I got to do something productive with that.
I agree. But at what point, Kim, are you not held responsible for the fact that your ancestors owned slaves?
That's a really important question. I think, and important to really dig into. I think that I grew up in the South. I had all kinds of, I went to a school that gave me all kinds of advantages.
Okay.
I grew up in Memphis, which is a city that's 60% Black. And how many Black girls were in my class? 0. Right?
Wow.
There's and that school helped me get into certain university, it has had a material impact on my life. So I think that it is, I feel like I got to do something about that, got to do something with that.
But isn't disrupting the system of power, which is really how I think about you, Kim. I think about you as a major disruptor of systems of power.
Yes.
That is, as I'm getting to know you more and more and more, that is who you stand for, and that's what you are, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to do with this book. So I don't want to say I do nothing, but I also think it's important to acknowledge that's there in my psyche.
Yeah. No, I think that's, it's an interesting one, because as you and I were talking about before we came on air, you do get to a point in this where you talk about kind of the white, I want to use your exact language.
The white savior complex.
The white savior complex, right? Which I think is a really interesting one, because that was what I was reading with this a lot when I talked to a lot of white people about white guilt.
Yeah.
And the manifestation of white guilt and how it feels to me as a gay Black man when I'm on the receiving end of what was intended to be a protecting, a self-righteous act.
Instead it was sort of patronizing or something.
And it ultimately did not help me. Because either it forced the person who was in power to shame and not want to deal with me because they went into fear. And this is a bit what I was talking about with the human brain, right? To be candid with you, Kim, this is part of the issue I think that we're having with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and why we have so much DEI fatigue. Is because for decades we shamed people, particularly cisgender heterosexual white men. We shamed them into feeling like that they should be doing more for others. But that did not do anything in their brains. All that did was made them build up walls to say, I'm a bad person. I'm going to be villainized. I don't want to open my mouth at all. I don't want to have anything to do with this.
Yeah. And I think that at the same time, it can't be the responsibility of someone else to move me through my shame. Like that is
Yes.
my job, to move
Yes.
myself through my shame. Like,
Yes.
and
Yes.
you're right. Like shame it does put you in fight or flight mode. I can tell
100%.
you where I feel it in my body. I feel it
Yes.
in the backs of my knees.
Yes.
The same physical sensation I get if my kids step too close to the edge of a precipice. I mean, it's a real kind of panicky feeling.
Yep.
And it's important to learn how to move through that shame and to get to reclaim one's own executive function. Like when I was yelling at that guy, I was not in charge of my own executive function.
Yes. Yes. And that's a moment where you're at a concert and you're not regulated by any broader systems, rules, but in the workplace.
Yeah.
Although I know you give an example in the book, which I thought was really good.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's do that. Let's read. I'll skip ahead to the Incredible Hulk. So yes. there's a bunch of different ways that self-righteous shaming kind of plays out. One is moral grandstanding, but let's skip ahead to the Incredible Hulk, and then we'll skip ahead to white savior complex.
Great.
So here's my thoughts on the Incredible Hulk syndrome. Sometimes it's tempting to try to outbully the bully. Don't give in to that temptation. I've been guilty of this, and the results were not good. My team and I were pushing hard on a project late one Friday night when Amy, a woman who'd recently joined the company right out of college, came into my office in tears. Charles, another guy on the team, had taken one look at some analysis she'd done and said, "There you go, doing sales math again. I'm an engineer. Don't worry your pretty little head about the math." When she told me this, I was pissed. "That little shithead pipsqueak," I exclaimed. "Watch this." I picked up the phone, and when Charles answered, I started shouting. I was behaving like an asshole and enjoying myself way more than I should have. Helpful hint for avoiding self-righteous shaming. If it feels too good to say it or to hit send, stop. Years
Great
later,
advice.
that is like a mentor told me that. If it feels too good to hit send, stop. And that has stopped me. Those words have rung in my head. They've saved me, but they didn't save me in this moment. So years later, as my sister and I were watching the Avengers with our kids, a scene reminded me of this incident. Loki, the bad guy, says to the Hulk, "I am a god, you dull creature." The Hulk looks at him for a moment and then picks up Loki by the feet and smashes his head on the ground. Bam, bam, pause. Bam, 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 pause. Bam, bam. To the left, to the right, to the center a few times, back to the left. Loki is left humiliated and unable to get up. "Puny god," Hulk says, stomping off in disgust. Something about that scene so perfectly encapsulated the way that bullying makes me want to respond. Just grab the person by the ankles and smash them all around. The way I treated Charles was a Hulk moment for me. But did it make the situation any better for Amy? No. I had engaged in bullying myself. Ultimately, I regretted my behavior. About 5 years later, my husband wound up working on a project with Charles. And when Andy mentioned that I was his wife, Charles's eyes grew wide. "You are married to Kim Scott? What in the hell did you do to that guy?" my husband asked with a concerned laugh over dinner. I'd given in to my Incredible Hulk fantasy and acted like a complete asshole. That's not who I want to be. So that's an example of self-righteous shaming. Another one.
Yeah.
I have a bad tendency.
Well, look, here's what's interesting. I've taught DEI for many years now. And one of the things I think that makes us humans, an evolved species, is the ability to go from self-awareness to self-regulation.
Yeah.
Right. So to move it from the back of our brains to the front of our brains.
Yeah.
And the ability to regulate. And this, I really think is important. An important point for us to make, Kim, is to say, you have a responsibility as a leader, as an upstander, to self-regulate and to bring that forward and to put it through a conscious filter to say to yourself, like, am I enjoying this too much?
Yeah.
Am I being a hawk? Is this something about this that is a bit more animalistic?
Yeah.
than it is kind of an evolved human.
Yeah. Yeah. Am I using my lizard brain or my executive function brain? And let's try
Absolutely.
to get to that executive function brain.
Absolutely. Right. I mean, I think it's not even try. I mean, I say to people all the time, that is contemporary leadership,
Yeah.
right? If you
Yeah. If you
define
can't
leadership in
do that,
2023, you can't do that, right? You have to
yeah.
have that ability to be able to do that quickly and to be
Yeah.
able to do that in a way that is cognizant of those around you, aware
Yeah.
of those around you.
And
Yeah.
I think the problem is that there are some well-known examples of id leaders right now and
Very much so.
who are not doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And people accept it either because they're afraid or because they kind of enjoy the show. And like if you enjoy the show, go watch the Avengers. Don't
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
not don't go read The Economist. Like go
Yes.
watch the Avengers.
I mean, look, I agree with you. I think we tolerate the behavior far too often. I think back to this summer, I was working on a project with a person who's very powerful. And I came home one day and I said to my husband, because this person had walked in several days in a row and not acknowledged me. And I was in a very influential role in on this person's team. And I said to my husband, I said, I just don't want to do this anymore. Like, I don't want to interact with this person. And so I called the next day and I said, I won't be back. I'm not going to work on this project. I'm not going to work on this project anymore. And, without any explanation. Now, fully recognize I was able to do that. I had privilege to be able to walk away and not feel like I was to the detriment of my family and my income. But that was me being an upstander in that moment because I said, I'm going to walk away.
Yeah.
And not allow this person. And when I was asked ultimately why I walked away, I did say, because I was not respected. I was not seen.
Yeah.
And the behavior that person exhibited was not something that I'm interested in participating in.
Yeah. Good for you. Yeah. Good for you. And how did that feel? You must have felt pretty good.
It felt great to me. It felt great to me now. Honestly, in my mind, I don't know that it would even register to him because of the influence and power that he has.
Yeah.
And if my Hulk had taken over, I probably would have banged my chest and went in and said something really egregious to him.
Yeah.
But instead I chose to go at it a different route. And I really do believe that it may not be him, but people around him noticed, and people around him will begin to understand that they need to help control him a little differently.
Yeah. And it's far more likely that he would acknowledge his own behavior with you responding the way you did in a Hulk moment. Then he can behave like a Hulk too. And
exactly, which he loved to do, Yes. Yes. Yes.
Exactly. All right, let's read another version of self-righteous shaming that happens, which is called white savior complex. A related but different complex happens when white people arrogantly decide they are going to, quote unquote, save Black people and are in a position to do so because they are, quote unquote, better in some way. One predominantly white private school I knew bragged that their high school students had designed houses for people in a developing country. These kids' parents wouldn't trust their children to design a woodshed on their own property. Where did they get the notion that these kids could design houses that people would actually live in? This is just white supremacy in a different cloak. This approach often demonstrates that the white colleagues are in fact unaware of their own racism. I'm going to mispronounce the name. Teju Cole? Is that right?
I'm not sure.
Teju Cole has written about the white savior industrial complex. He explains it is not about justice. It is about having a big emotional experience that validates privilege.
Yeah. Look, I think it's a powerful paragraph that's written there, Kim. And I think it is one that I really would behoove white people to think about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because when you step in, that absolutely is undermined and underpinned by, I feel like I'm better than.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. And I mean, you could say this with mansplaining. You could say this with so many other different things, right? I feel like the way that I can say it is going to be better. The way that I am going to build it is going to be better, which starts from a place of me stepping on your head.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like for in terms of gender, it's like the knight in shining armor. And how
Yeah.
many times have I had some guy, come usually often at work, "Oh, you need my help." I don't need your help. I don't
Yes.
I,
Yes.
and I think, it also, even in leadership speak, has to do, like, I'm going to empower my employees. You don't need to empower them. You just need to get out of their way.
Yes, 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 yes. And I even see it, like I even see it in the gay community where, you know, there's a stereotype that effeminate gay men need
Mhm.
a more masculine man to help protect
Yeah.
them and to
Oh my
speak
gosh,
for
I had
them.
never thought, yeah, that is also a knight in shining armor complex.
Absolutely, right? Absolutely. And it couldn't be farther from the truth. And I
Yeah.
just think that we really have to think about, again, going back to why are we doing this? What is our intention here?
Yeah.
And if we can't answer that question, maybe we should just stop and pause and not step in those moments.
Yeah. Yeah. What is our intention? And also, what is the emotional itch
Yeah.
that we're
Yeah.
scratching, and
Yeah.
is it a good emotion or a bad emotion? Yeah.
That's interesting, right? Because I do believe I say a lot. I say I don't, I used to believe, when I was younger days, I used to believe, and this is I think part of my orientation being a gay Black kid growing up, was I believed that there were a lot of really evil people in the world. I just believed that I was not that person who believed everyone was born good. I actually believe differently. Now, as an adult, I do believe most people are born good, but I do believe, Kim, there are some people who thrive off negative emotions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And it feeds and fuels what they do. And so, I would say for that small population of people, it's a different conversation of how to interact with them. But I agree
Yeah.
with you. What emotion is this evoking inside of me is a really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting having grown up as a white kid without any not rich, but without any financial problems.
Yeah.
I definitely am always shocked when I see people behaving evil. Like, it always,
Yeah.
and it takes
Yeah.
me way too long
Yeah.
to recognize, frankly.
Yeah.
And I think that's a privilege that I've come, that I've been wrestling with. The optimism, in some ways, my optimism is
That's right.
is a privilege that has sometimes tripped me up, because sometimes it's wrong, it's incorrect.
That's right. That's
That
right.
people
That's right.
are always one way or another way.
I'm left thinking sometimes, I've seen far too many times. In fact, I was watching Good Morning America the other day, and they had one of their segments where they were awarding this Black woman some money for the work that she did in her community. And I looked at the Black woman's face, and instead of joy, I saw embarrassment. And that what they thought, I think, was a good thing actually embarrassed her, to the extent of she didn't need that level of recognition or this kind of white institution stepping in over top of
Yeah.
her. And so sometimes I really do believe that the savior complex, that we're going to give her X amount of money and a trip to wherever, actually doesn't help, because that's not what that person's motivated by. That's not why that person is doing that work. And so again, it goes back to say, how would the person, if I have a level of empathy and I think about how will the person receiving this, who I'm defending, standing up for, how are they going to respond to this?
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting one.
Really
And
important.
and if you can't answer that, then the question becomes, should you be standing up for that person?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. and I think the question also is, are you standing up for someone, or are you standing up to something?
That's exactly right.
And more often, when you're standing up to, then you're really upstanding. Whereas when you're standing up for, you're likely to trip into moral grandstanding.
I agree. Well, Kim, this has been super great. I love this.
Great conversation. Thank you. You're going to help me make this part of the book. I struggled with this part of the book.
No, probably keep pressing it. It's a conversation that has to be had. You know?
And I think part of the reason why I struggled is my own sort of white guilt, white whatever. Yeah.
Yep.
All right, Ernest, always a pleasure. Thank you so much. And folks who are listening, give us some feedback. We want to know what you think.
Please. Yes. Thanks, Kim. We'll talk soon.
Thank you. Take care.